If you look at Mubadala's history in the past 20 plus years, we've gone, Mustafa, through multiple iterations and versions in terms of how we work, how we strategize, how we organize ourselves. I think this is an important agility, and adaptability is an important strength of Mubadala that we need to keep it, and we need to protect it, and we need to continue to have it.
I'm your host, Mustafa Al-Rawi. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the exchange Khaled Al-Marri, CEO of Real Assets at Mubadala. Khaled, good to see you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
I mean, I want to dive into this whole idea of real assets at Mubadala, because it's when I think of it and I read about it, I see there are ports, there are logistics, there are airports, there's obviously infrastructure, literally what is real and tangible. But there is a kind of thread that joins them all together when it comes to Mubadala, and it would be good to kind of understand the context of how real assets sits within the wider business, and you know, what drives, you know, those investment choices.
Well, I think, you know, in any investment firm, the way you construct your portfolio has to be driven by a set of principles, and one of those principles is diversification. And when you think of real assets and how it fits into Mubadala, it's from that diversification angle. So it's supposed to be the asset class that delivers stable returns in a consistent way, kind of low risk, that complements the overall portfolio. Sometimes we call it the stabilizer. So this is really how it fits.
And it's, when you say stability, that's kind of, in my mind, I think long term. And these are the kind of assets that you know will be there 10, 20, 30 years. And are those the horizons that you're working along? That's
the whole essence of real assets, is to invest in businesses that are physical, hard assets that you can touch, that will be there for a very long time, and that will be super essential to the economy. So the essentiality of real assets, whether it's a real estate or infrastructure, whether it's a port or a building, that essentiality makes it by default a long-term investment. And that's the beauty of real assets, whether it's infra or real estate.
When we think of that, of infrastructure and logistics and ports and real estate, it you know, in the past they would have probably been, you know, unchanging maybe, and they would have been, you know, a bridge is a bridge, a road is a road, a port is a port. But now we have forces at work in the world that are kind of propelling economies, creating opportunities, but also creating challenges that are sort of swirling around real assets, such as digitalization or decarbonization, or the fact that there's a lot of infrastructure out there that's aging. And, you know, we think about, you know, how these forces are at work. And so you kind of need to think how these affect your investments and how these kind of impact value and ensuring that you're meeting your returns and what you need.
I think you mentioned an interesting point. Today, real assets, it's not about ports or bridges or buildings. It extends beyond that. And that's the beauty of this asset class, is it will always be the foundation and the enabler for every strategic shift, whether it's a macro or a big trend like decarbonization, digitizations, or deglobalization, the supply chain, etc. I think as a real asset investor, sometimes when there is a lot of hype and momentum in some of those mega trends, whether it's digitization, and you hear today about the data centers turbocharged by AI, power supply demand imbalance, whenever there's hype and momentum, as a real asset investor, it's important to stay disciplined and stay focused and driven by fundamentals, because you are so essential to that mega trend. You don't have to be carried away by that kind of momentum. You need to stick to the original roots of you being an infra or a real asset investor, which is you want to look at things like visibility into the cash flow. There has to be some offtakes and contracts that protect your top line. It has to be inflation linked. It has to have some monopolistic features. So you don't have to get overexcited, because mistakes happen when you get overexcited and try to chase. And what happens is that you start venturing outside the risk parameters of infrastructure.
You've said before that return is the outcome of structured risk. And is that essentially what you've been describing?
Exactly. So, but I think to simplify this, because when you hear structured risk is kind of, it's a big term, but I'll try to simplify it. So if you invest today, whether as Mustafa or as an organization, as Mubadala, you target a certain return, right? And once you understand the target return that you want to take, that you want to target, which is a function of the risks, then you need to construct your risk. I call it risk castle. So, which is basically the same term as structuring your risk. You want to make sure that you add all the terms and all the features into the agreement, into the shareholder agreement, into the share purchase agreement to protect against those risks. So structuring risk is very, very important. And I think investors need to spend more time understanding the downside and trying to structure around it, rather than spending most of the time thinking about what would go well. So I think, we tend to spend more time on what would go well vis-a-vis what could go wrong.
So, I mean, I like that expression of risk castle. In my mind, it creates something very tangible and very strong. And you talk, some of the factors that you mention, they seem like common sense. But what is behind those decisions is how much of it is common sense intuition versus data led. And then, you say that some of the upside or the returns are going to be, contracted, but then you need to be sure of the downsides. So it's sort of conviction versus certainty as well. So what's kind of the ideal balance if anybody is thinking about taking this approach to investing in real assets?
Well, first, let's agree on something. You will never, ever have perfect data. So data will always be imperfect, and there will always be a missing part. What fills that incompleteness or imperfection is the judgment, right? And the judgment is a function of your experience. It gets refined and honed through experience. So when you make an investment decision, let's say you're going to invest in a midstream pipeline that takes gas from point A to B. You will base your investment decision on data from the past. So you want to make sure that you get as much data as possible, and you want to make sure that you get as accurate data as possible, because you cannot get 100% accurate data and you cannot get 100% complete data, but you want to try your best to get the best possible. Then you will underwrite certain assumptions in the future. That underwriting of the future is a function of the historical data and your judgment, which is a function of the experience. You need to learn from the stories of success. You need to learn from the stories of failure. And that actually form your judgment, and then forms the conviction that you have and the belief that you have about that specific thesis. And conviction is always a function of the depth and the quality of the work that you do. So that's basically where you balance between kind of, data, intuition, and judgment. But what's more important than this, you can have the best people that form the best judgments, or people that have the best skills. What matters the most is having the right investment process that continues to evolve and gets refined and gets better day after day, months after months, year after year. Without that investment process, you can have the best skills, you can have the best judgment, but it's not going to work. You can have 11 Cristiano Ronaldos on one team, but if they don't have the right process or the right strategy or the right tactics, it's just not going to go anywhere.
I mean, you brought up a lot of points that I want to get into, for example, talent and teams and leadership. But you mentioned experience. And so, if today, when I look at your position in your career and what you're doing, you have that vantage point when you talk about an investment process. You're on the investment committee in Mubadala, you head up real assets. But then if I look at experience, it's been a 20-year career with Mubadala for you, going all the way back to when you started out as a trainee with Mubadala, and you've seen this institution grow and go through successes, challenges, opportunities, and so when you if I ask you to kind of think about that 20-year process, is it that those 20 years with Mubadala that really informs that conviction, that intuition, that judgment that you mentioned?
While experience is important, the whole ecosystem, the whole institution, and how the whole institution functions is far more important than experience alone. You want to make sure that you have, let's take Mubadala as an example, you want to make sure that you have the right processes and the right forums to communicate with your people vertically and horizontally. You want to make sure that you have the right decision forums that has the right composition of the complementary kind of skill set that debate decisions and make investment decisions. You want to make sure that you have the right environment and culture that provides growth, learning opportunities for people. You want to have the right values. You want to have the right leadership.
And again, to focus on your career a little bit, because I understand the ecosystem, the institution, Mubadala as a place at large, and the processes and the people around you, but also you've seen different phases of growth in Mubadala, but also you've seen different units. So you started out on the semiconductor side, for example, and maybe you've come full circle a bit now, where in real assets you're having to see how the semiconductor business has moved on. And maybe when you started out, it was in a completely different part of the cycle. And then you went into sort of disruptive investments and disruptive assets. And again, those are the same forces that are kind of influencing some of the investment decisions that you're making. Do you carry that with you, the knowledge of what you've experienced in a 20-year career?
So I think if you look at the next few years, it's hard to visualize it. But what we have today, we have control over today, right? So we can shape how today looks like and make it ready for the future. So as a Mubadala investment firm, or as a real assets platform, or as Abu Dhabi, or as the country, you want to make sure that what you're building today is going to be sustainable for the future. And what you leave for the next generation is going to be something that will be ready for what comes next. So in the real assets platform, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can devise a strategy that is future proof. How can we devise a strategy that invests in areas and sectors and assets that will be resilient, that will be well prepared for the next cycle? How we build our organization in a way that can withstand different circumstances and challenges and continue to be there. Same thing in the country. You want to make sure that you build an economy that is well diversified, that is sustainable, that is resilient, that when you pass it on to the future generation, they'll thank you for it, right? So they're not gonna give you a hard time and have to go and rebuild and take them 5 years back. So having that mindset about the future in every single act and action that you take in the present is so critical. And because, capital doesn't build nations, right? So it's about men with strong value, right? So you have kids, and if you leave money and capital to your kids without skills and values, what's going to happen?
Yeah, they will they will lose it all.
Exactly.
And if we're talking about future generations, how has your experience, I mentioned your career, but also you've lived not just in the UAE, Abu Dhabi, but also elsewhere in Singapore. You've spent time in the US. How does that shape your thoughts around developing that talent, about leadership, about ensuring that you've talked about teams. You mentioned 11 Cristiano Ronaldos. Let's say you have that brilliant team. You have brilliant people around you. How do you help to lead them? How do you ensure that they are able to be empowered and to follow at the same time?
I was very blessed and fortunate to have had the opportunity to live in different parts of the world at different stages of my life and at different stages of maturity. Living in the US when I was a student, as a student, you tend to learn, you're coming out of a culture into a different culture. You tend to learn more about self-reliance, about independence, about respect, tolerating other cultures. And what's more important is that you tend also to test some of the values that you learned during your upbringing and some of the perceptions that you formed in your kind of home country and culture. Sometimes some perceptions driven by traditions, you test them and you think that you need to, that reinforces the importance of those values. Sometimes you kind of look at things from different angles and you learn something during your upbringing, but when you go into a different culture, you start test it and look at it from a different angle and maybe learn new things about it. I'll give you an example. So in our culture, usually when we have conversations with people, we don't tend to be direct and straightforward. We like to kind of, go into kind of circles, and sometimes we try to avoid having difficult, candid conversations. But when you go into a different cultures like US, people are straightforward, people are direct. So you tend to kind of try to strike the right balance. And that's the beauty of living in a different part of the world. So now if you go to Singapore, I lived there with my family and I was an employee. I used to work in a fab in Global Foundries. And as an employee, kind of, at more mature part of your life, you have deeper interactions with your colleagues. You tend to learn different things, how business organizations in different parts of the world function, what values are important to them. So it's a different set of learnings. Also, as a family, being there with my family and kids, they go to school there. You live the expat life, so you appreciate how expat in your home country think, and you can relate to them. And you learn a lot of interesting things about the society. In Singapore, it's a society that values process. They value planning, they value systems, etc. So it broadens your horizon. It makes you more kind of a 360 leader. And, leaders need to have broad horizons and need to be able to work with different people with different ideas, with different cultures, with different values. That agility and flexibility is something that you learn faster and more when you interact with different cultures and different people.
And, speaking of testing, you've tested yourself in extreme situations, climbing mountains, cycling challenges. You've been in nature, you've survived, you've thrived maybe in when you've tested yourself to your limits. How does that experience when you test yourself play out in your career and your success?
Listen, I think if we're going to talk about these experiences, we need like a whole podcast and another hour. But maybe I'll try to pick one experience, which is climbing Kilimanjaro. As you know, Kilimanjaro is the highest peak in Africa. It's about 5,800 meters. And it takes 4 days to reach the top. And usually you go through different climates. The fourth day, which is the very, very tough day, which is the summit push, which is the final push to the top. And it's very Arctic climate, frozen, snow, windy, dark, because you start the summit push at midnight. So you're not well fed because of the altitude sickness. You know, it's pretty hard to eat. You don't have sleep. And you need to start at midnight. And it's quite steep. You're super tired. And you need to go step by step. That last summit push, last day, that where actually most of the experience you get with these experiences. So imagine how many times in your life you had a conversation with yourself about giving up. It's enough. I got to go back.
Many times.
Once every 5 years, once every 10 years, right? Once every few years. Sounds like you had a lot of
I
them.
love them. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, I've had many conversations, but when what you've described in that moment, when you have to climb the summit, that's what you're there for. You've come all that way to do that.
Exactly. Now, let me tell you. So in that summit push, which takes about 10 to 15 hours on the way up and way back, almost every, no exaggeration, every 5 to 10 minutes, you have that conversation with yourself. What am I doing here? What am I trying to prove? And it's a very logical step to quit and go back. And when you overcome that conversation on and on and on, hundreds of times in one day, in a compressed period, that's the experience. That's where you stretch your limits. It becomes a reinforcement that it's about the mental strength. It's about the mental fitness, not the muscles. It's about that brain that talks to you. And that actually takes us to the second learning in this experience, which is preparation is important. Preparation is very, very important. It's a lot more important than motivation. So motivation will get you somewhere, but you're not going to finish, right? You need to, the acclimatization, the training, the hours that you spend kind of, preparing to simple things like the gear, right? And by the way, when you climb there, you have people with you that help and support, carry the bags and the gear, etc. And they sing for you, trying to motivate you. The Akuna Matata song. But, that's not going to help you if you don't have the right jacket, if you don't have water, if you don't have the right tablets for the altitude sickness, if you don't have that mental strength. So motivation will get you somewhere, but, to reach the finish line, preparation, training, getting ready is far more important.
And when you're leading teams and you understand there will be a moment in a difficult situation when everyone questions their motives, you remember that if you're prepared, if you're well prepared, you're well motivated, you know what you're trying to do, then you can accomplish what you set out to do.
100%.
And I think it'd be good to know from our perspective, when you think about the next 10 years, and if you're looking back and you think about the investment decisions that have been made and the journey that Mubadala would have been on, looking back, what do you hope you can say, yes, we set out to do that, and that's what we accomplished?
I think maybe this takes us to maybe talk a little bit about the early days of Mubadala, when Mubadala started, and the impetus behind the creation of Mubadala, and want to understand the history of Mubadala, or the spark that actually got the Mubadala to be created, it's important to understand the history of the UAE, the history of Abu Dhabi. So if you go back before oil, we were a group of small coastal towns, right? Living on pearl, trading, small-scale agriculture, fishing, camels, dates, etc. And when Sheikh Zayed, the founder of the UAE, rahmatullah alayh, when he became the president in 1971 and UAE was established, the Union of the Seven Emirates, Sheikh Zayed, he had a country that pretty much had nothing in terms of public institutions, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of roads, bridges, airports, schools, hospitals. There wasn't much there. So his focus and his priority during that 30-plus period that he ruled was how to lay the foundation for the future generation. Goes back to our point about passing, legacy to the future generation. So he focused on building the foundation in terms of public institutions, in terms of schools, in terms of infrastructure, hospitals, bridges, ports, etc. And he want to make sure that the successors, they come with foundation already laid. And that's exactly what happened when the successor, Sheikh Khalifa, and currently Sheikh Mohammed, Allah yahfadha yatawwal bi'umrah, he basically has a country that is ready, right? That has all the foundations. And he just need to start thinking about the future. What comes next? How can I take this country to the next level? Which is building sustainable economies, diversified economies, innovation-based, knowledge-based economies. And that's why you hear the bets like, UAE making bets on AI and decarbonization and playing a key role in these mega trends because they had all the time to think about what's next. Back in the early 2004, around the times when Mubadala started. So when Mubadala started in 2004, it was during that time where the whole kind of country and leadership is thinking about what's next. And that was the impetus behind creating Mubadala to be a force for economic diversification, to be a force to take the country and the economy to the next level. And today, I think, 20 plus years fast forward, seeing Mubadala becoming a 330 billion sovereign wealth fund, super successful, top quartile from a performance perspective amongst its peers, it's very fulfilling. But what's more fulfilling, not the returns. Maximizing returns is important because this is how you sustain yourself. But what keeps us going, what keeps us like waking up every morning excited to go to work is the impact. It's the impact that we're creating, whether locally in building industrial champions that become globally competitive, or creating jobs, or creating economic activity in our country, or maybe building a port in a low-income area in X country that creates job, that improve the quality of life, or addressing some global challenges such as climate, energy transition, or producing beautiful products that go into, cars or go into phones. This is what excites us. It's the meaning. It's the impact.
And 20 years ago, when you started out at Mubadala, did you have a sense of that spark, of that impact that you wanted to help?
We had a dream. Our mandate was clear. We had clarity in terms of the direction of travel, and that's important. So the vision was clear. We knew where we were going, but we started basically, there was nothing. It was and the time where we started corporate mindset, corporate culture was a new thing here in the UAE, because the biggest employers were the government and some, government affiliated industrial firms. So having these kind of investment firms wasn't, there was Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, but the culture was new. And so we had to have the humility to learn. That made us as an organization very agile and very adaptive and always willing to pivot when circumstances change. To me, this is an important strength of Mubadala. We are humble enough to acknowledge the areas where we need to learn or partner with partners or develop, etc. But if you combine this humility with conviction, because when you form a perspective to go into a certain direction, you need to have the conviction. This has to be based on data, based on judgments, based on a strong conviction. And when you have that conviction, you just stay the course. You stay the course, but when circumstances changes, you have the humility to pause, reflect, reassess, and make the right changes. And if you look at Mubadala's history in the past 20 plus years, we've gone, Mustafa, through multiple iterations and versions in terms of how we work, how we strategize, how we organize ourselves. And I think this is an important agility and adaptability is an important strength of Mubadala, that we need to keep it and we need to protect it and we need to continue to have it. And we're going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to be a fascinating journey. And I think we're far from, where we see the potential.
As a last thing for our audience, it'd be great to understand for you, if in any moment of truth, if there is a film or a podcast or a book that you think of that inspires you in that moment, that you'd like to kind of highlight to the audience.
You took me to the good old times when I was in Singapore. So I decided to go and take a couple of days just on my own. And I went to Bali alone, and I took a book that someone recommended it to me. It's written by Robin Sharma. It's called, I don't know the exact order of the title. It's called The CEO, the Surfer, and the Saint, or The Saint, the CEO, and the Surfer. And the main point in the book is that everything happens in your life for a reason, and most likely for a good reason. Whatever happens to you in life, there is a good reason for it. Whether it's something that you did not think you were happy with or you wanted, it will turn out to be actually the right thing that happened to you. And I took this principle to support me as I evolve in my life and career, whether it's personal or professional, not to fight, the circumstances, but to adapt, to live with it, and try to just wake up every morning and just do my best, and things are going to take care of itself. And this has been an important principle for me that I am so grateful to, and it's something that I always try to teach my kids or advise, some of my friends and colleagues.
Well, I appreciate it. And thank you so much, Khaled and Marri, for being with us in the exchange.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.